afternoon and welcome to Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Zagreb, for the third podcast entitled Women and Leadership as a part of the announcement, the US-Croatia Forum, a 21st Century Partnership, which is the largest diplomatic and economic gathering marking 30 years of cooperation between US and Croatia. My guest today is really extraordinary lady, Miss Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Councila, the oldest and largest technology trade association. She has a background in information technology, operations, and finance. Russo previously worked for a large multinational Fortune 500 companies as well as at Maya Design and in adjunct faculty and project role at Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome, Audrey, and thank you for joining us today.
It is a thrill to be here.
Thank you. And for a start, I would just like you to comment on corporate culture a bit. Which features would you like to highlight in the American corporate culture?
You know, that is a very broad question, and I'm glad that you're asking that. I think it really depends. So the world today has really changed. Mm-hmm. The way that it's really changed is, and we're going to talk about women. We're also going to talk about innovation, and we're going to talk about, you know, the future of where we've been. So one of the things that I want to bring up is that when we talk about corporate, we can talk about those companies that are Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. But I think what we're seeing is the shift around the number of women, face it, the number of women who are educated and go to college is at an all-time high. The number of women in the workforce is at an all-time high, although COVID has really changed the name of the game because many people had a lot of flexibility in terms of working from home, being remote. So there's been a lot of pressure on women in terms of women having, you know, flexibility and responsibility. So when you talk about corporate culture, it's really difficult to pinpoint just one kind of example. The opportunities for women happen to be endless right now. But the issues in the United States is that very often women are not earning the same per dollar as men are earning. So if you look at maybe 82 cents on each dollar that women earn for the same kind of role, the disparities seem to still exist. However, many of our leading corporations have taken extraordinary measures to do things such as making sure that there's board diversity. In the state of California alone, any company that's actually a public company is actually required to have at least one woman on their board. And we are seeing the rise of women and people of color in having the statute of being on boards. And that in and of itself has started to shift when we think about corporate culture, because as you have leaders on boards, as you have women inside, you know that those changes are happening across the culture. You've seen now over the last 2 years, a huge proliferation of women who are, and people of color who are running new jobs called Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. You've seen those kinds of roles have really changed in the United States. That's where the culture has really started to shift. So have we achieved parity? Have we achieved equality? Not yet. But what we've seen also is the number of women who have started their own companies and said to themselves, you know what, I'm not going to, march in to the same kind of culture anymore. I'm going to create it myself. So it's a big question. It's a wide question, but it's definitely one that takes a new kind of dimension.
In which sectors of the economy, science, and research do women occupy leading positions, and in your opinion, why? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, again, it's interesting because in the United States, we actually have seen a shift, right? Because more women are going to the university, more women are achieving the outcomes of advanced degrees. But what we have seen, what's really interesting, that while women have achieved and matriculated through the university to achieve advanced degrees, what we are seeing is that women are still not running and achieving the highest levels in tech-related, STEM-related positions. It is still not changed.
Why do you think that is? Maybe because of the glass ceiling. We use the term as a political term or a metaphor to describe the inability of women to advance in business hierarchy. So, considering your opinion, in what sectors of the US economy do you see that to be the greatest issue? And in what sectors do women face the least obstacles?
Well, it's very interesting. Every year in my organization, we look at the role called Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer. So those two jobs, right? And they are considered what in the United States we call C-suite jobs. They're jobs that typically report to a Chief Executive Officer. We are seeing a shrinking of women who are in those roles. We are not seeing the kind of growth that one would assume, and particularly for the big multinational corporations. So the question that I wrestle with, and that I hope our listeners wrestle with, is what are some of the obstacles and why? So one of the things I would say is many of these kinds of jobs have responsibilities that are massive, and and women can do that. Women can take and multitask and transcend and be able to, move forward whatever it is that the task is at hand. So I'm a huge proponent knowing that women have these unique capabilities. The question is what is the pipeline? In the United States, we use this terminology. What is succession plan and what is the pipeline? And if the pipeline is not filled with people who look different and have different experiences and perspectives, the value of the company seems to shrink. And we're starting to see that the impact of women on boards and women in executive positions are changing the value proposition for these corporations. But we're also impatient. So if we're impatient, we might not want to stick around too long to wait for those openings. The other thing that's happened in corporate America is there was a time when there were lots of jobs, right? Lots of opportunities to move up what you call the ladder. But with the innovation, with technology and with innovation, there are less of those jobs. So there are more people that are competing for less of those kinds of jobs today. And so as a result, we see women shift into wanting to build their own businesses, wanting to run small companies, wanting to be at the helm of innovation.
So like
where
entrepreneurship,
building,
right? Yeah.
Right, and entrepreneurship, exactly. So I think those are the two plates that I tend to see spinning, which is good, right? Which is really good.
Yeah.
And what about, can you tell me what progress has been made in the last 20 years? In the case of which problems do you see, and also maybe perspectives, where do you see women in the next 10 years or so? And do you think that women are generally on a better path to success than it was before?
Well, I mean, I can tell you 20 years ago and working in information technology, there were very few women. There were very few women, and the women who were in those roles were very often what I would call support roles.
Yeah.
So they might necessarily be practitioners or people who are solving computational science related issues. That's definitely changed, right? In 20 years, that has changed in corporate America, but it hasn't changed fast enough.
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed fast enough. That's why I mentioned the disparity of pay and the focus on public companies by making sure that they have women and people of color on their board. That to me will take, ask me that question in 5 years. I think the next 5 years will be the horizon to say what has really changed. The other thing is, I mentioned earlier, entrepreneurship. There is a lot of opportunity for women to build, if they have experience in wanting to solve a problem, and they have a background in innovation and tech and in business and finance, they may feel, and they often do, feel that they have more opportunity building something of their own than waiting for a ladder that has gotten so small at the top. But I do, today, I think the Fortune 100 companies in the United States, I don't think the number of women has shifted in the last few years. There's not that many women that are at the helm of a publicly held company.
Yeah, even in 21st century, right? So, yeah. Okay, let's move on to women's mentorship. So, can you tell us when did it all start? And regarding women's mentorship, can you tell us more about its development, characteristics, and the situation in the US?
Well, the term mentorship is something that I would really like to sort of set the table so that everyone can really understand.
Yeah.
There's formal mentor relationships that many corporations have in place. And they have them in place in many, many shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're very formal. Sometimes you're part of a high potential succession plan, and that's you're assigned someone. And then sometimes you have relationships outside the organization, and it's a coaching kind of relationship into the organization. There's many shapes and sizes of it. But there is a belief in corporate America and a practice that if you can establish mentorship at the senior level and build relationships at the senior level, that you will be able to have a pathway into more responsibility and more opportunity and more financial opportunity, as well as power and influence. But I like to challenge people to think a little differently. That you can amass mentors. If women are out there listening to this, you can amass mentors throughout your life, through every exchange that you have. It could be that a mentorship could be, I had a powerful conversation with another woman who was doing something. And from that, I gleaned an opportunity and a new perspective about myself. So I think part of it is that we as women cannot assume that someone else is going to mentor us, and as a result, we are going to get there. Instead, I say to women, please, you can act as a mentor to anyone. You can reach out, because it's a reciprocal relationship that you get. It goes both ways. So sometimes I have people in my life that are younger and in technology, and they're in innovation. I learn just as much from having a relationship with them as they do with me. So it's really, we have to get away from thinking that women need mentorship. What women need are opportunities. We need opportunities, and we need to say that when we see a job and we see an opportunity, we don't say to ourselves, we're not qualified for it. Women tend to do that. Women tend to think that if they read a job description and then they say to themselves, I don't have all the qualifications.
We tend to be much more critical, yeah.
Right. They're much more self-critical. But instead, say to yourself, of course you don't, because why would you go into a job where you've mastered everything already? You go into a new job to grow and expand your skill sets. So I think part of that is just deep conversations with other women, other leaders, and understand where we have all failed and where we fail to take those risks. Because risks don't necessarily come from entrepreneurship. It also comes from your day-to-day job. It's a long answer, but I wanted to get those points across about mentorship.
Yes, and to talk about more in a line with that mentorship that we just started, from your personal experience, do you consider maybe your mentor crucial for your success, or was the main turning point in your career rather the result of something else, like an event or situation? Can you just give us a little bit
on that?
I have had very few what I would call mentors. I have had very good professional relationships with a wide array of people. And so the secret to me is fostering relationships. And that means fostering relationships that can go both ways. How can I help you? How can you help me? And those are the kinds of relationships that last the longest, because people change jobs, people change careers. And so the wider you have relationships across different business sectors, different opportunities, and those relationships are ways for you to give. Okay, it's not just you receiving, it's a way for you to give. And those relationships tend to be the most powerful ones and the most long lasting. And building relationships across gender as well is really, really important, because you will begin to understand, as I have in my own career, that the relationships that I've had with men and women have been so important in me understanding a wide perspective. So that means your relationships need to span a diverse bunch of people. So you need to have people of color. You need to have, people who have different religious beliefs. You need to have people like that in your life, because it makes you a more resilient and more engaged person.
Yes.
So I've had a few people in my life that have been very powerful and have been very forthright with me, but I've also had many, many people who have just one little word, one little piece of feedback has shifted it for me. So let's not get too trapped in that.
Yeah, okay.
And what about the differences in leadership between women and men? Because some research has shown that there are differences in personal characteristics of men and women which are likely to affect their leadership style. For example, men seem to be less risk averse. So do you think men could benefit from having a female mentor and vice versa? And what are the most important things that we can actually learn from each other? You answered the question partly, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more.
Absolutely. So I would like to say, I know there's a lot of research about the difference of women and men's style. And I think part of that research is based on the fact that so many of their subject matters were women who had not moved up, right? We don't have enough research on those women who have achieved higher level, what I would call C-suite positions. Let's ask them, right? Let's do some research on them. But so not to dispel that the research isn't important, I like to say anecdotally that I think women are able to multitask in an enormous amount more than men. Now, some would say that's because we're mothers, we're sisters, we've been in some traditional roles that have required us to manage households or teams or kids, or, that we've been able to multitask. There's a saying that says, if you want to get something done, ask a busy woman. Right?
Yes, I agree.
Because she will get it done. So I think part of the difference between men and women right now might just be where we are in terms of the corporate journey. Because I do agree with you, though, that I think that women overall are afraid to ask and are afraid to take some risks. And we have to look deep behind that. Is it because their need for security? Do they have a bigger need for security of taking care of themselves? There are more women that are single now and head of household than ever before. So maybe they're not as, maybe this is such a big opportunity, a new move for them, that they are afraid to take some risks. Maybe it's because they're in an environment where they haven't seen a lot of risk taking, and the risk taking that they do see looks different. So I think we're at a very, very interesting time, particularly in the United States, as more women are on boards. When more women being on boards will change the fabric of this conversation, and hopefully will change the parity so that women earn the same amount of money as men for the same job, for the same work.
Yes, hopefully it will come soon. I'm waiting definitely for that to come to Croatia as well. But about those differences, could then we learn from men and men from us, you know, in that corporate culture and the way of doing business? And what do you think?
Well, I don't know, in Croatia, do a lot of men play golf?
Well, not not a lot of them. Just maybe those that have bigger paychecks and maybe some spare free time. So they do, yeah, but not a lot of them. It's not an average sport, definitely.
But in the United States, I always joke and say, if you really want to try to navigate, you probably could benefit from playing golf. Because both young and older men do tend to enjoy that, but that's not everyone, right? That's not everyone. But that is sort of like a joke, and you know, it's an American joke, and it probably doesn't translate
to Croatia. It doesn't. But okay.
Right. I mean, when you have more money, you have more free time, and you can pay other people to do things. And women, you know, if they're paid less, they don't necessarily have that kind of flexibility. The other thing is the responsibility for childcare is enormous.
Yes.
In the US, the responsibility is just drastic. The amount it costs for childcare is crippling. It's crippling. Even for someone who has a very good wage, it's still crippling. So for those years 0 to 5, it can be the equivalent of going to a university, and that's what you're paying for 0 to 5. So very often there are women who
stay at home, right? Because they have little babies. Yeah.
Make their choice. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Did I answer your entire question?
I think that you have, yeah. And to go to women in STEM, so how to promote women in these fields more, maybe? Because today we have an image of a successful leader in technology sector, and it's still often associated with men. So to what extent do you think women's efforts to succeed are impaired due to stereotyping? And is it possible to expect in the near future that the perception of a successful technology leader will change in favor of women?
Well, you know, it has to happen. It has to happen early. It has to happen early. It can't, you know, they say that by the time you're 12, there are many things that you know, you succumb to peer pressure. So it has to happen early. We have to make technology, science, we have to make it, I want to say fun is probably not even, we have to make it cool. We have to make it that it has an allure. And I can tell you that we've put together here, just in our local community, robotics for young girls, science and leadership for young girls. And you can see that if you keep it going for long, it can't be like just one event. Right?
Yes,
you have to learn how do they build things. They become part of a group of other girls or other peers, and they start to build their confidence in building robots and participating in science experiments. But it has to happen early. It can't happen by the time someone's 17 or 18.
Yeah.
It has to happen by the time that they're 10, 11, 12, and it has to be immersed.
So in elementary school already, okay, yeah, right. So,
and it has to be cool. It has to be cool. Someone said to me, Audrey, science, technology, engineering, and math is not cool. As hard as we try to do that, we have to make it really cool. So
you look at me, I'm like a professor in statistics in
suit, you know, we wouldn't believe it probably, but I like maths, so that's
I love it. No,
so
but I love it. See, that's
that's
the perfect example, right? The perfect example is you are debunking the myth. You are saying to the world, I can be who I am. I can wear pink. And I can
high heels and teach statistics.
And high heels, that's right. Yeah. And you are a role model because many times young girls in particular will look and say, I don't see myself. If I don't see myself in these kinds of roles, it's not attractive to me. So my hat's off to you that you are doing that in your own way.
Thank you.
Because it matters.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about that stereotyping? What are the most common stereotypes related to women in leadership in America?
Right, that they're nerds.
When you are
right?
like comparing men and women, what goes for men and what goes for women when we are talking about stereotyping?
Right, but well, it's interesting when you think of women that are in science, you think very often they think of women who are nerds, women who keep to themselves. They're not athletic. They're not necessarily pretty. They don't necessarily care about fashion. They don't necessarily, they're not into sports. They're not into socializing. And none of that is true, right? None of that is true. But it becomes true if we let it be. And if we don't see people like ourselves, then we don't think that there's really a pathway for us. We think that there's a certain kind of persona. But there's a lot of good news. There really is a lot of good news. The good news is that women want to start their own businesses. Women are passionate about going to college and being heavily educated. We're not seeing a change, right? We're seeing more and more people of color having new pathways to having careers and being matriculated in the university. So we are seeing it. It's just, to the naked eye, it doesn't seem like it's happening fast enough.
Yeah. It seems to be maybe too slow, but it's good that it's happening. So what would be your message to young women in business? And maybe could you tell us a few top tips from your own success story?
Top tips?
Yes. For women.
Top tips are take risks. Always be prepared for what's next. So plan now for your next opportunity. Have lots of relationships with a diverse set of people. Make sure that you have a wide range of friends as well, that your perspective, so that your whole perspective on differences and cultural differences is embedded into your life. The other thing is that everyone says don't be afraid to fail, right? None of us wants to fail. The question is, when we fail, how do we learn? And what do we say out loud? What do we say out loud when we fail? Do we say, I failed?
What can I learn from it? Or I failed and I'm not trying anything anymore, right?
I failed and I'm just covering my head because I'm never going to try anything again, right? And
so the motivation behind it all, and the lesson that we learned.
Right. And how do we share that? We don't just share it inside of ourselves, but who do you know that's close enough to you that you can talk about it with so that you can feel safe? The other thing is fail fast. Fail really fast and stand up really fast.
Yes, that's, I think that there is an African proverb or something like that. It says, fall 5 times, but you should get up 6. So, just keep moving, whatever happens.
And just keep moving and just continue to keep moving. You can't stay still. The world is moving fast. The world is moving faster than ever before. And so the opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, the opportunities for executive positions has gotten smaller and smaller. And so the competition is fierce.
Yes.
So the question is, where do you find yourself? Where do you find yourself in terms of what role, what opportunity? Many people say, follow your passion. I say, follow where your skills are, right?
Yes,
what skills
I agree.
you want, right? Because follow my passions. I might be a singer today and I have a terrible voice, but I love to sing, right? I love to sing.
Maybe under the shower, but not on the stage, right? So, yes.
Right.
They have to be objective. So, Definitely.
Right.
So what would be your message then to young women? Maybe a sentence or two.
So my message, let's see, I have a long message, as you can
Okay.
tell.
It's fine with me. Listen up, girls. Okay, here's the message.
It's really to figure out who your authentic self is. Who are you, right? And how do you embrace that and embed that in your work? And that's not an easy journey, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And remember, sometimes it's great to just not just be devious, but pretend like you already have achieved that next level. Pretend, because that is typically what most people do. No one has all the answers.
True.
So don't think that just because someone is in a particular role, you're not able to do that either. But observe. One of the things that I do like to say, I will boil this down, is it's one thing to be interesting and competent and have a great academic background and even have some great jobs. But what's more important is to be interested. Be interested in others, be interested in topics, be interested in learning. Always be learning. Figure out what it is that you're learning. Read
always
a lot.
Be a student, right? Always be a
Always
student.
Be a student. Always be a student.
Okay.
Nice message for every woman that is going to watch this podcast, I believe. And maybe to wrap up, tomorrow we celebrate International Women's Day. So could you tell us more about how the March 8 is celebrated in US? Do you have any customs or something?
So many ways. I mean, obviously through social media, there isn't a company that isn't celebrating their women. This is something that's we've really embraced in the United States over the last few years. It's been relatively recent. The thing that's very exciting is the focus on women of all different cultures and races. It's really exciting to see that. And throughout International Women's Day, to see that there really is a community of women leaders all around the world. And that is something that companies of all shapes and sizes always recognize. Women's Month, International Women's Day, and it's built into the fabric of who we are in the United States. Despite the fact that we haven't achieved the parity that we need to achieve. But I applaud our focus on this.
Okay, Audrey, thank you very much for joining us today and for your valuable time. And thank you all for watching our podcast, and goodbye from Faculty of Economics and Business.